November 19th, 1982. The Blue Room, Harlem. 10:03 in the evening. Diana Cole walked to the edge of the stage without her band behind her. No announcement, no introduction. Just a woman in a burgundy dress stepping into a spotlight with the kind of face that tells you something has already gone very wrong. She gripped the microphone stand with both hands and looked out at the room. There were maybe 80 people in there. Small tables, low ceiling, the kind of place where the air itself smelled like cigarettes and old wood, and something that had been spilled and cleaned 100 times. Arthur Walsh sat near the back with a glass of bourbon and a legal pad he hadn't written anything on in an hour. He had come from Midtown specifically for this. His flight back to London left at 7 in the morning. Diana stood under the light and said the things she had never said on a stage in 11 years of performing. "I need to ask you something. Our lead singer lost her voice 2 hours ago. She's in the back right now and she can't go on. I am not ready to cancel this show, but I can't do it alone." She paused. "Is there anyone in this room tonight who can sing?" Nobody moved. The bartender kept wiping the same stretch of counter. A man near the door looked at the woman beside him. She looked at the floor. Arthur Walsh uncrossed his legs and recrossed them the other way, slowly, like a man recalibrating the value of his evening. 17 seconds passed. Someone counted them later. It felt longer. Then from a small table near the back left wall, a chair moved. Not dramatically, not the kind of scrape that announces itself. Just the quiet shift of wood against wood that happens when someone stands up who has already made their decision. She was 18 years old. Nobody in that room knew her name. She was wearing a plain gray sweater and jeans, and she had been nursing the same ginger ale for the past hour and a half because she didn't have money for anything else. She had come that night with her cousin, who had wanted to leave 40 minutes ago but stayed because of the music coming through the walls. She raised her hand to about shoulder height. "I know the songs," she said. Her voice, even just saying that, 4 words at normal volume in a small room, made the woman at the next table turn her head. Diana looked at her from the stage, a teenager in a gray sweater. No portfolio, no backing, just a hand raised and 4 words. Diana said, "Come up." What happened in the next 90 minutes is the part of this story that the people who were there have never fully agreed on. Not in the details. Everyone agrees on the details. They disagree on how to explain what it felt like. Some of them have tried. Most of them eventually stopped trying and said some version of the same thing. You had to be there. The girl walked to the stage without rushing. That was the first thing James Cooper, Diana's bassist, noticed. No wave to the crowd, no adjustment of the microphone with that particular self-consciousness that signals someone performing the act of performing. She took the microphone off the stand, looked at James, then at Marcus Webb behind the drum kit, and said quietly, just to them, "What key does Lisa sing it in?" James told her. She nodded once. That was it. Marcus raised his sticks, clicked them twice, and she came in exactly on time. The first song was a mid-tempo R&B number Diana had written 2 years earlier about a woman who keeps returning to a place that no longer exists. It required range. It required the kind of control that lets you pull back at exactly the right moment without losing the thread of emotion underneath. By the end of the first verse, 3 conversations in the room had stopped. By the chorus, Arthur Walsh had put down his bourbon. He didn't pick it up again for the rest of the set. The thing about a voice like that is that it doesn't announce itself. The voices that announce themselves are impressive. You hear them and you think, that is a remarkable instrument. You note it the way you note an expensive car passing on the street. Impressed and then moving on. What happened in the Blue Room that night was different. It was closer to the feeling you get when you're reading late at night and a sentence stops you and you read it again. Not because you missed something, but because you need to confirm that it said what you think it said. James was watching her left hand during the second verse. She was marking time against her thigh, barely visible, just a quiet tap. And what she was doing rhythmically was something he had only heard done correctly by singers who had been performing for 20 years. She was sitting slightly behind the beat on purpose, not late, sitting behind it, like she had all the time in the world and already knew how the song was going to end. It made every line land harder than it had a right to. The second song was a ballad, the kind of song that rewards a voice that knows when not to push, when to let a note breathe instead of fill it, when to give the silence a job to do. She let the silence work. There is a moment in that song, a held note near the end of the bridge, that Lisa Monroe had always ornamented. A run, fast and controlled, the kind of technical display that reminded everyone she had real training behind her. The girl held it plain. No run, no ornamentation, just the note, straight and open, held for almost 3 full seconds longer than the melody required. A woman in the third row put her hand over her mouth. Her friend reached over and held her arm without looking at her, both eyes fixed on the stage. Arthur Walsh picked up his legal pad and wrote 2 words. Then he turned the pad face down on the table. Diana Cole was standing at the side of the stage watching. She had expected competence. Maybe, if the night was kind, something a little better than competent. She had not expected this. She was standing at the side of her own stage with her arms crossed and her head tilted slightly, in the slow, disorienting sensation of watching someone younger than her students dismantle every assumption she had walked in with. The girl wasn't performing at the audience. She was singing to something inside the song, something only she could hear, and the audience was being let in to watch over her shoulder. Diana had spent 11 years in music. She had seen the first version of talent hundreds of times, the kind that knows it is talent and uses it to impress you. She was watching the second version now, and it would take her 3 days to find the words for it. The third song was the one that made Arthur Walsh stand up from his table. It was a gospel-inflected number with call and response built into its structure. Diana stepped to her own microphone and sang the first call. The girl answered. Diana had not set this up. She simply sent the phrase out into the room and waited to see what would happen. The girl caught it, turned it, and sent back something Diana had not written. Not the written response, something that fit the space better than the written response ever had. Diana sent another phrase. The girl answered again, different, complimentary, like she was finishing Diana's sentences in a language they had both learned before either of them could have named it. 3 minutes into that exchange, half the room was on its feet without quite knowing when they had stood. Arthur Walsh was one of them. Her name was Whitney Houston, and she was 18 years old, and she had not yet made a record. She had grown up in Newark, New Jersey, the daughter of Cissy Houston, who had sung backup on records you have heard and never thought to look up who was on them. She had been in church choirs since she could stand. She had done session work, backup vocals, small appearances that were supposed to build towards something, the exact shape of which no one had yet agreed on. What nobody in that room knew was that she had not come to the Blue Room that night with anything particular in mind. She had come because her cousin wanted to go out, and she had no money to spend anywhere else, and the music through the walls sounded like something worth being near. She had almost stayed home. She had been sitting on the edge of her bed at 8:30 that evening, too tired to move, too restless to stay still, and her cousin had knocked on the door and said, "Come on," and she had grabbed her coat without thinking. She had not come to audition. She had not come to be discovered. She had not even particularly wanted to go out that night. She raised her hand that night not because she saw an opportunity, but because the songs were ones she knew, and it felt wrong to leave a stage empty when she could do something about it. That is the part of the story that gets mentioned least. What nobody talks about is what Whitney was carrying into that room. Her mother's voice, always close, never quite satisfied. The question that had followed her since she was old enough to understand it, was the gift hers? Or was it something she had borrowed from the church and from Cissy and from Newark and would eventually have to give back? There were people in the industry who had heard her name. Nothing had been signed. Clive Davis had been given a cassette. That cassette was sitting somewhere on a desk in a building on 6th Avenue, and nobody had told her what was going to happen with it. She was 18, and she did not know yet if she was going to make it. And that particular not knowing had been sitting in her chest for months with the particular weight of something you can't put down and can't quite carry either. When Diana Cole asked the room for help, Whitney Houston stood up. It was a Thursday night in November, and she had nothing else to do, and the music sounded good. Sometimes that's all it is. After the set ended, Arthur Walsh crossed the room. He didn't go to Diana first. Diana watched him walk past her toward the girl who was setting the microphone back in its stand, and she had the experience of watching someone else arrive at the same conclusion she had reached 20 minutes ago. Walsh introduced himself. Whitney shook his hand. She did not appear to know who he was. He told her who he was. She said, "Oh." He asked if she had representation. She said no. He asked if she had recorded anything. She said some backup work. He said he would like to speak with her properly, not tonight, somewhere where they could actually talk. She said okay. Then she turned and looked for Diana. And when she found her, she walked past Walsh entirely and said the thing that Diana would still be telling people 25 years later. "Thank you for letting me up there. I hope Lisa feels better." That was it. No moment. No awareness of the man standing behind her with his legal pad. She found her cousin at a table near the wall, finished the ginger ale she had left there 90 minutes earlier, pulled on her coat, and left. Arista Records signed her 14 months later. Her debut album sold over 20 million copies. The second one sold more. The voice that Walsh had turned his legal pad face down over that Thursday night in Harlem would eventually become the standard against which every other voice in the industry was measured. Diana Cole gave one interview in 2003 in a small music magazine that no longer exists, where she was asked about the best performance she had ever witnessed. She did not name a stadium concert. She did not name any of the things that history bothered to record. She named a Thursday night in Harlem in November 1982. A girl in a gray sweater, 4 words, and a room full of people who had no idea, not one of them, what they were sitting inside until the voice opened up and told them. Have you ever watched someone do something so naturally that you forgot to be impressed until it was already over? Tell us in the comments. And subscribe, because the best stories are always the ones nobody planned.